They say that in the NFL, every moment is earned because it's so competitive. You're kind of always fighting for your place at the table. That's not true of all players, right? Justin Jefferson isn't fighting for anything, and there are five-star Ohio State recruits that kind of take the royal path through everything, but that wasn't the case for Ivan Pace Jr. He's had to earn everything, and he's going to have to earn it again. Welcome to the Everyman series on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. You can find the show wherever you find your favorite podcasts, whether it is some audio app or platform, YouTube. We're on YouTube if you're watching. Hello. Or you can watch on Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Special shout out to my hashtag everydayers, people who listen to this show each and every single day. I appreciate you greatly. Sound off if you can. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Today, we're going to continue with the Everyman series. We'll talk a little bit about Ivan Pace and his teammate Wil Huber. Both undrafted free agents for the Vikings, a couple of Cincinnati Bearcats. We will go over their paths to the NFL. And then we'll talk to Alex Frank, who does Locked On Bearcats, at the end of the show and get a little more insight on those guys from somebody who covered them for all of last year. I covered Wil Huber for 5 years. But before I get too specific, I actually want to take you all the way back to 1995. The Colerain Cardinals, who were Ohio State champions, but the Monday before the state championship game, this was a huge scandal. They actually had to vacate all of their wins for that season because they found out that one of their players was actually ineligible. He was in his 5th year in high school, and I don't actually know the details of it, and they're not important, but that player was Ivan Pace Sr. Now, Ivan Pace Sr. would grow up, have a couple kids, Ivan Jr., who we will get familiar with, and Deshaun, who we'll probably get to know next year. And those kids grew up and played together, spent time together. They even ran the local youth football group program together. Deshaun played a little bit, or he played on defense. Ivan played a little bit of everything. He was a two-way player, playing running back and linebacker. So these guys would meet in like Oklahoma drills sometimes. These guys were like, they're tight as brothers. And I wanted to start with that just to give you like the context of imagine being a father who had this legacy, and hey, he's still got a ring from that 95 team and the jersey and all that stuff. And it's ultimately just sort of a footnote on what was otherwise a season worth celebrating and remembering. And then watching your kids do the same thing. And I think it was 2018 when they actually made a run at state themselves. And this is Ohio. This is what winning state in Ohio is something else. There's quite a few schools in Ohio that'll give you a run for your money. So here's the thing, though, about Ivan Jr., who's of course we're going to focus on. He played kind of tweener roles. I mean, he played a little bit of running back, a little bit of fullback, a little bit of linebacker, some DB, some edge rusher, all this stuff, because he's a really good football player. So they kind of played him everywhere. He was everything, but that made things kind of tough for recruiters to figure out where they wanted to put him because he had a little bit of a tweener body too. He was a little bit too big to be like a safety, but he was a little bit too small to be like an edge rusher. And so it's like, I guess we'll put you at linebacker, but you're still kind of a little bit of a weird size for linebacker. So if you ask him, that's probably the best reason for why schools doubted him. And he didn't actually end up getting the offers that he wanted from some of the bigger schools, in particular the Cincinnati Bearcats. He describes that as a half offer. I don't really know what that means, but probably like a not real scholarship or like a walk-on or something like that. So he ends up going to Miami of Ohio, a rival of the Cincinnati Bearcats. And when he gets there, he commits to playing defense. as a lot of players do when they get into the college ranks. They'll kind of pick a side. But when he gets to the sideline, he's still like, hey, coach, I'm not gassed. Can I get out there and run a little bit? That's insane in college. I mean, you do not see a lot of two-way players in college, really ever. But as a true freshman, most of the time as a true freshman, you're going to redshirt and learn. You're going to maybe like work your body into the shape it needs to be, because you come out of high school, you could be kind of whatever body type. Who knows what they had you doing there. But for Ivan Pace as a true freshman, he got in. I think like 6 games in, the coaches decided they weren't happy with their pass rush. They're going to shake things up. And hey, Ivan Pace looks great in practice. Let's put him in. And he would play for the rest of his time at Miami of Ohio. I should mention the 6-sack game he got versus Akron. I should mention making all MAC in 2021 and really proving that he probably should have gotten an offer from somewhere else. And so when I say he's got to earn his keep, I mean, this is a true freshman, 2-star recruit coming into Miami of Ohio, winning a job halfway through his first season and becoming a superstar. And then he's got to earn it all again, because he enters the transfer portal for the 2022 season. Now, let's back up and check in on Deshaun, who was recruited by Cincinnati and is playing defense on the Cincinnati Bearcats. The Cincinnati Bearcats just had a linebacker leave for the draft. They had a couple of older seniors. We'll talk a little bit more about them when we talk about Wil Huber. But they had a couple of older players that had now kind of made their leave, and so there was an opening. You can see where this is headed. So Ivan Pace transfers to Cincinnati. No longer, I mean, there were games, Cincinnati versus Miami of Ohio that were, rivalry games, even though both these guys were playing defense. So you never got the fun moment of like Deshaun tackling Ivan Pace, but they were still rivals. Now they get to be on the same team instead of having to just play against each other once. They get to be on the same field every time. But when he goes to Cincinnati, so he wore number 0 at Miami of Ohio, and he wanted to go earn number 0 at Cincinnati, or he had to earn number 0 at Cincinnati. He said, I want number 0, and the coach said, no. You're going to have number 17 for spring practice. We'll give you number 0 if you earn it. You're 260, which is way too big to play linebacker, so he had to shed some of that weight. He wasn't agile enough, so he had to knocked off 30 pounds in the weight room, played great spring football, got a lot more agile. And 260 at like a stocky build, it's just a really weird body type, and it's making coaches not really believe, but he got the weight where he needed it to be, and then he took first team reps, rotated them with a guy who had been starting for 3 years for the Bearcats, and beat that guy out for the job. Has an incredible season, a whole bunch of sacks, a whole bunch of tackles. You've heard about all that. All ACC, and goes and declares for the draft. But again, weird body type, maybe a little bit undersized now for a linebacker. It's just kind of a strange, what scout's going to stick their neck out? And that's how one college coach who was describing Ivan Pace's recruitment process said, nobody's going to stick their neck out for a 6-foot linebacker. And that might be the case in the NFL as well. Nobody's going to stick their neck out for this guy, even though they see him be really good. Like, nobody's going to be the guy that fell in love with a 6-foot linebacker and was wrong, right? Because, I could have seen that coming, right? So he's overlooked, falls all the way out of the draft, and now he has to earn it again. But I think if you listen to this whole story, I don't know, man. I dare you to give him an opportunity. We'll see what he does with it. He's also joining with a teammate. He got to go to Miami of Ohio with a Colerain teammate. Colerain High School was a feeder school for like a bunch of Ohio colleges, a ton of Bearcats, a ton of Miami. I think a healthy amount of Ohio State too. A lot of people come out of Colerain. And so he kind of got to enter college with a teammate. He gets to enter pros with a teammate, and we'll see if he can win some competitions. One of the people he'll be competing with is that old teammate, Wil Huber, who we will get into in just a moment. But first, let me tell you about America's #1 sportsbook. It's FanDuel. FanDuel is the best place to go place a good old wager, a good old gamble on the NBA playoffs as they get heating up, pun intended. But hey, if you mess up on that first bet, like say, somebody who's not supposed to win wins, like we have seen, you can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. And if you go to fanduel.com/lockedon, that's how you get that no sweat first bet. You will see a ton of great promotions every single day, an app that is safe and secure and that pays out instantly when you win. There's no better place to bet on all of that playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon. Get that no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's fanduel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Moving right along with this Locked On Vikings Everyman series. Before we get into Wil Huber, I want a quick shout out patreon.com/Luke Braun NFL, where you can find an in-depth Dwayne McBride breakdown with probably more tape than you've seen other places. I really had to chase it down. Thank you to those who helped. You know who you are. And was able to actually get some good insights on Dwayne McBride. I'm like super jacked on him. So if you want to see some positivity, some excitement, go watch it. Wil Huber was, if Ivan Pace had to fight for his place at the table at Cincinnati, had to go through Miami of Ohio, get over a recruitment process, Wil Huber, it was destined from the day he was born. He went home in a Cincinnati Bearcats onesie from the hospital when he was born. His great-grandfather was a Cincinnati Bearcat. His grandfather was a Cincinnati Bearcat. His father played football for the Cincinnati Bearcats. Daryl Huber played tight end there. Never got to the NFL. Never had a winning season in the mid-'80s when the Cincinnati Bearcats program was a little bit of a struggle. But nonetheless, Wil Huber decided he's going to go to follow in the family footsteps, go to Cincinnati, be a tight end like his father. But when he got there, he found a very crowded room. Getting reps at tight end were not that was not coming easy. He was buried behind Josiah DeGuara, to name one that actually got drafted, but 3 different guys ended up getting chances in the NFL in that room, and he kind of said, all right, the writing's on the wall here. I'm never going to get this. But he played a little bit of two-way in high school, like a lot of players do. He was playing special teams, like, young college players, a lot of times they'll get in on special teams, so you don't have the starters do it, same as the NFL. And you kind of chase and tackle on special teams, right? It's coverage, and it's a skill set that he kind of thought, hey, my game is not bad for this. What if I just started playing linebacker? And so he ends up doing that in his second year at Cincinnati. It's his 2019, and the Bearcats have a couple of guys that are starting, but they don't have a whole lot of depth. So I think even Deshaun Pace is he is joined the team by now, but I think he's a DB and he's a true freshman. So it's like they don't have a lot of depth. So yeah, they'll kind of transition. And he slowly learned and incubated. He was a sponge, really being mentored by these older guys and really taking in everything he could learn. In 2019, he was a 3-way player, which is insane. How cool is that? He played offense, defense, and special teams. A little bit of tight end, a little bit of special teams, a little bit of linebacker. By 2020, he's full-time defense. By 2021, he is a starter on one of the best defenses that program has ever put forth. Probably the best. I'm not going to go check the history, but I bet. I mean, that's the Sauce Gardner. That's the crazy defense with everybody on it, right? That 2021 team, I remind you, won 13 games, went to the college football playoff. That's the furthest the Cincinnati program has ever been. Greatest season in program history, if you ask me. I don't think they have any secret national championships that I don't know about, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. But I once again want to go back to the perspective of Daryl Huber, Wilson's dad, who's watching all the games and gets to watch his son play in the Cotton Bowl against Alabama, Bryce Young, and all of that stuff. And I want to fast forward to the third quarter, about 8 minutes left, 17-6. So Cincinnati's still hanging around. Maybe they can get something here. And Wilson Huber drops back into coverage. Bryce Young breaks the pocket. Huber tracks him down in front of the whole nation, gets a sack on Bryce Young. It's just one sack. It's not going to define your career, but what a moment to define yourself on and define your family on for the Hubers, a Cincinnati Bearcats to their roots family, watching a Huber get a sack in the Cotton Bowl. I think the gravity of that moment, if you have kids, cannot be understated. If you have kids, you probably understand it better than I do. Um, that brings us to 2022. Well, Wilson Huber has already been very much declared a leader on the Bearcats, but he's formally named captain. Ivan Pace has now joined. Deshaun Pace is playing linebacker next to him. And for more on that season, let us go to Alex Frank, who does Locked on Bearcats. All right, everybody, very excited to have another Locked on College host to come in and talk about some of these new Vikings. We got a couple of Cincinnati Bearcats here now on the Vikings in Ivan Pace and Wil Huber. So let's talk to Alex Frank of Locked on Bearcats. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start. You know what? Let's mix it. Let's start with Wilson Huber. Everybody starts with Ivan Pace. Tell me what we are getting in Wilson Huber in an off-ball linebacker, like super broad strokes.
I think there's two things you're going to get with Wilson Huber, Luke, and thank you so much for having me on to talk about Bearcats that signed as undrafted free agents with the Minnesota Vikings. I think Wilson Huber is going to bring some energy. He's definitely an energizer in the room. He's a very passionate player, which is something that I think if I were an NFL scout or a GM, I would look for, particularly in a line. He's going to bring experience. Here's a guy who spent 6 seasons as a college football player. And this is something that I'm not sure a lot of people know, is that he was a tight end originally. When he first came in to the the University of Cincinnati, he was a tight end. And the coaching staff then under head coach Luke Fickell, so he's played tight end, he's played special teams, and he's played linebacker. So he sees the game from multiple different ways. He comes from a football family, so that helps. So you're going to get a guy who is going to be, if he finds a way onto the 53-man roster, he recovered a fumble on special teams on a kickoff in Notre Dame in 2021, which is arguably the biggest win in Bearcats school history for the Bearcats. So you're going to get a lot of good attributes from Wilson Huber that could help him find a spot onto the Vikings 53-man roster.
And that's what all these guys are trying to do, is either sneak onto the roster. But honestly, for undrafted guys especially, the practice squad can be a win too. You stay in the building, you get access to the facility, you get to try again next year on a futures contract, most likely. But let's move to the other guy, Ivan Pace. This is somebody that a lot of Vikings fans wanted the Vikings to draft in, round 5, round even 4. Ends up falling all the way out of the draft and coming to the Vikings anyways. Was the top undrafted free agent available on the Pro Football Network consensus board, like by consensus, one of the top undrafted free agents coming to be a Viking. What are the Vikings getting in Ivan Pace that they should be excited about getting without even spending a draft pick?
Well, with Ivan Pace Jr., you're getting a guy who plays with an electric motor. Here is a guy who was a unanimous first-team All-American, the American Athletic Conference Defensive Player of the Year, and a guy who racked up 137 tackles last year. Now, those don't even begin to tell the story of the kind of player he was for the Bearcats in 2022. But you're going to get a guy who plays with an electric motor. Don't let the size deter you or any Vikings fans, because this guy, he's only six. I mean, the Bearcats website lists him as 6 foot, 235 pounds. But we're talking about a guy who had 137 tackles. And then, Luke, listen to this: 21 and a half tackles for loss, 21 and a half tackles for loss, I said, 10 sacks, and 3 forced fumbles. He was 6th in the country nationally in tackles, 3rd in tackles for loss, and number 10 in sacks. Was Pro Football Focus's college's 2nd highest defensive player and top linebacker. Finalist for the Dick Butkus Award and the Ben Narek Award. So this is a guy who had an unbelievable final season of college football with the Bearcats. He's a guy who, as Dane Brugler noted in his draft guide, The Beast, Dane Brugler said that he has a violent on-field demeanor. He has a nose for the football. He knows where the ball is going on every play. And he is a very, very good finisher when it comes to tackling. He is a very, very good player who could thrive in a defensive system led by Vikings' new defensive coordinator, Brian Flores. He is going to be able to excel if he finds a way onto the roster, because Brian Flores' defenses, as you've told me, he likes to blitz. And Ivan Pace Jr. is excellent when it comes to blitzing and getting after the quarterback. This guy is going to make life very, very difficult for Vikings offense in training camp and for opposing offenses when it comes to the preseason. And that is going to stand out to hopefully Brian Flores and Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell as they whittle down their roster to 53 players come August.
And that has to be, I think, the way onto the roster for some of these guys. Although, and we've been talking about this on Locked On Vikings, that linebacker group is pretty open. So I certainly wouldn't put it past them. By the way, for a much deeper conversation on these guys, you guys can go to Locked On Bearcats. This episode will probably be airing way after that one did. So you might have to like scroll back a little bit. I think it went up on May 10th is the plan for you. Yeah. So that is kind of the next thing is as blitzers, both of these guys, because Brian Flores loves to blitz, super blitz heavy. And a lot of times it's just sending 5. And a lot of times that means a linebacker is kind of walking up over the A gap, creepers, stuff like that. What do these guys bring as blitzers that leads to all of that production?
I mean, they bring the ability. Again, these two guys have played in defensive systems that one of the concepts is getting after the quarterback. The Bearcats were very good at racking up sacks the last 2 seasons. Really, also if you go back, into 2020 and years prior. But they are going to bring a lot as blitzers because, again, they have the ability to finish. If you're Wil Huber in particular, Luke, he's a guy who can play on the outside, come off the edge, and get a sack. So you're going to be you're going to be able to have a lot come out of Wil Huber being. I'm trying to remember what linebacker position he played, but what I do know is he can come off either edge and get after the quarterback. He is a great finisher, and Ivan Pace is a blitzer to the max. I mean, he's a guy who, he would have, there was one game against Indiana where he had 2.5 sacks and 4.5 tackles for loss. And that's pretty good for, any game, college or pro. So you're going to be able to get a lot out of these guys when it comes to blitzing. And I'm glad to see that the Vikings are going to be able to blitz because when I look at their roster, and I've watched the Vikings the last 2 seasons. The Bengals played them in 2021. I'm a huge Bengals fan in addition to being a Bearcats fan. They have some really good defensive players. And I think that I remember being a Bengals fan, Mike Zimmer, when he was their head coach.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Zimmer had great blitzers in his time with the Bengals and with the Vikings, as you know. So it's great to see a guy like Brian Flores come in and they're going to say, okay, we're going to get after quarterbacks because that's how we're going to win games defensively. If that's what is being said and is being preached in Minnesota, and Pace and Huber are going to be able to bring that to the Vikings.
Yeah, we'll see if they can crack the roster. Alex, tell people where they can find everything that you do.
No question. Thank you, Luke. So I'm on Twitter at Frankie_Natty. You can also check out Locked On Bearcats on YouTube. You can also check it out free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, at Locked On Cats on Twitter.
Excellent. Alex, thank you so much for your time, man.
Luke, thank you. It's always great to come on with you.
Thanks again to Alex, and thanks again to all of you for flipping on Locked On Vikings every single day. Tomorrow is Twitter Tuesday, so get your questions in. You can send them to me at Luke Braun NFL or at Locked On Vikings on Twitter. You can send an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. Fill out the Google form in the show notes or leave a YouTube comment. However, you can get it to me. I'll find it. I will see you all for that. And as always, Skol.